All right. Welcome, everyone. Just letting everyone get their sound come on. We are 5 minutes past. We're still waiting for a few more athletes to join us tonight, but we'll get started. My name is Candace Druin, if you have not met me or have not had the chance to meet you. And we are very, very privileged tonight to have Alfie and Patrick joining us from the Financial Literacy Council, along with their colleague Kelly, who will be monitoring our chat room. Myself and our team of game plan advisors and coordinators from Ontario, Alberta, and Calgary, and BC are very, very happy that the team has agreed to give us a bit of a landscape of what's going on in our economy right now, giving us some skills and some tools to help us take control of our finances. And I will let the two introduce themselves. We have been working with FLC for the last 9 years. We're coming up on a decade. We're going to have to celebrate that for sure. And many of our athletes have had great success working with them to help in a lot of different areas around taxes or around setting up the athlete. Sorry, I'm forgetting what the name is. The fund for the athlete trust for the ways to manage your money while you're still competing. So without further ado, I will turn it over to the FLC team.
Thank you, Candace. My name is Patrick Chee. I just want to thank you for inviting us back and hosting the session, Anna and Candace. I also want to thank you, Amy and Dominique from CSI Calgary and Ontario for your continuous support. These 10 years wouldn't have happened without your continuous support. Today's session is called The Great Reset, Taking Control of Your Finances. And the objective of this session will help athletes take control of their finances amid economic changes. You will learn the fundamentals of managing cash flow, taxes, and how to invest wisely. The faculty speakers today are myself, Patrick Chee. I'm a certified financial planner. And also we have Alphil Guilaran, who is the co-founder of Financial Literacy Council. I will now pass it over to Alphil, who will talk a little bit about disclosure before we start.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening and taking time out of your schedule to invest in increasing your financial literacy. So before we begin, we just want to disclose that the content that you're going to learn today has been developed independently by myself, Patrick, and Kelly. And what that means is it's free from commercial bias from banks and insurance companies, as we are not employed by any of those organizations. I'm the co-founder of the Financial Literacy Council. We were founded back in 1999. And as Candace mentioned, we started working with CSI Pacific 9 years ago, and our programs have expanded across the country. Patrick Chee is a certified financial planner with our team. As last but not least, we also provide CSI with financial coaching and financial planning services. So we want to provide you with an opportunity to implement what you learned from today's workshop by accessing the Athlete Help Desk. And so the Athlete Help Desk was designed specifically to help you get answers to your top financial concerns and questions. And so there's a QR code on the screen. If you scan that, you go onto this landing page that you see here, and then you can get the process started. So to tell you more about the financial coaching process and what that looks like, I'll hand it back to Patrick.
Thank you, Alphil. So when you go to our landing site to sign up and to take advantage of the two offering of the coaching sessions free charge to you, it's a benefit as part of being part of the CSI community. So whether you're an athlete, a coach, or even a CSI staff, that door is open for you to meet with myself or one of our team members. That coaching process is during the first meeting we'll conduct that discovery meeting, which will identify your top priorities and concerns. From there, we will create that financial description for you based on the financial house framework, which we'll unpack in today's session. In the second meeting, we'll present that financial prescription with action steps for you to take away with. Just like when you meet with your doctor before they write that medical prescription, they diagnose you and then give you that medical prescription and where you choose to fill it. So that's the same for us. You're under no obligation to work with our team to implement them. However, if you decide to work with us, you will sign an engagement letter to clarify and define the financial planner and client relationship.
Thank you, Patrick. All right, so let's get into the meat and potatoes of today's workshop. So we're going to break down this topic in 3 parts. The first one is the importance of integrated financial planning. Secondly, we're going to give you some tips and advice to keep more of what you earn. And in the third part, we're going to show you how to protect your profit centers, so your ability to earn money, as well as invest it wisely. And we're going to have some time for Q&A. So I'm going to start with the first part, integrated financial planning. And I'll start with a quote. So Benjamin Franklin, you probably know them. There was a song called All About the Benjamins, so the $100 bills in the US. So Benjamin Franklin was a former United States president, and he has this famous quote that says, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And oftentimes when we work with athletes and professionals, they tend to tell us, well, I don't really need a financial plan. I don't have any money to plan with. And so we would say that's a course for disaster. So before you even have money, you need to have a plan in terms of how you're going to navigate the different options you'll have once you start making money. And if you already have money, you probably know that it's important to have a plan so that you can reach your life goals. Now, we would just want to set a baseline in terms of what is financial planning. So financial planning is a step-by-step approach to being in control of money to reach your life goals. And so really, it's a document wherein there's collaboration and there's accountability. So as an athlete, you're probably well aware that accountability moves you forward. So whether it's in the dressing room or if you're in a leadership role in your sport, or even if you're on the ice or you're competing, that there is accountability to yourself, to your coach, to your team, the members of your team. And so that's how financial planning really works. It's really outlining that step-by-step approach. And we're going to unpack that in terms of the 9 rooms of the financial house. Now, when it comes to having a financial plan, there are 3 areas that it needs to provide direction for. So the first one is events out of your control. So this is really about inspecting what you expect from your plan. So events out of your control, I mean, we're feeling that right now with the inflation, the rise in interest rates, and just the cost of living is going up. So those are things that are out of our control. And so really we're talking about managing risks as well as the different economic cycles that we find ourselves in, primarily inflation and interest rates, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. The second thing your plan will speak to is things that are in your control. So really having a financial plan, investing in your future, these are things that you can choose today to do. And if you procrastinate, of course, there's going to be consequences to that. So we always want to remind you that you need to be proactive when it comes to things that are in your control. And last but not least, it should speak to how you're going to grow your wealth. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're always relying on your time, talent, and skills to earn a living. And so you want to make sure that your money is working hard for you. So this is really where your plan speaks about creating passive income streams greater than your earned income streams. So think of passive income as making money while you sleep. And for those of you who are visual learners, this is from Dr. John Lamb, who's an eye doctor that we work with. Funny enough, he works with a lot of athletes. And so he talks about the 3 facets of financial planning in terms of the 3 things that I just talked about and what's involved with that. So you can see that on the screen, and we'll unpack a number of these as we go through today's workshop. So in terms of setting more of the context, I do want to talk about the events out of your control from the standpoint of economic cycles. So I believe that's top of mind for everyone right now, especially with inflation now at 6.9%, but it peaked at 8.1% back in the summer. And so this is basically the cycle of how the economy works. And experts would agree, you're in Canada, that we're heading into a recession. So a recession is really 2 back-to-back quarters of negative economic growth. Now, when we speak about economic growth, it's measured by calculating a country's GDP, or gross domestic product. So gross domestic product is a formula, looks at the consumption that we take on as consumers. It also looks at gross private investment in terms of how much is invested in our country. You can see it by all the home builds or buildings coming up, or as well as government investment. So when they're building bridges, highways, and then government spending. So, and exports minus imports. So that's where we get this real GDP or net GDP. So as we enter into this recession, we need to brace ourselves that we're not in a time of growth. So how did we get here? So first and foremost, there was the pandemic. So because of the pandemic, which started in 2020, our government was committed to help keep us afloat. So they provided government measures, they've lowered interest rates, all in an effort to make sure that there was money in the system and that our economy wouldn't just have a basically abrupt stop. So think about a car and you want to avoid an accident, you push on the brakes and it's just abrupt. So they didn't want that to happen. But the consequence of it is there was so much money in the system chasing fewer goods and services. And to add to this, there's the Ukraine war, there's what's happening in China where they're somewhat still in lockdowns because they have a zero COVID tolerance. And so the factory of the world basically shut down. And so then you have your supply chain issues. And so there's less goods coming into the country. And so to manage this demand, the government has decided to raise interest rates. And as a result, that's a domino effect. So the second the government raises interest rates, basically the interest they charge to the banks, then the banks pass it on to you and me. And so what ended up happening is our prime rate, so prime rate is the best rate they'll give their best customers, went from 2.45% to now it's 5.45% in the span of a year. And so that's an increase of 122% if you compare it to this time last year. And so really what they're trying to do is to reduce demand for products and services. And so now what we find ourselves in is we're going into this contraction in our economy. And later on, Patrick will speak on, well, how do you invest your money now that we're going into a recession as opposed to an expansion? And so that just sets the context, all in an effort to say, you know what, there are things that are outside of our control. Like we can't control this. However, we can respond to it by doing these next two things, which is the things that are in our control. A, having a plan. Two, continuing to invest, because some would argue that, hey, since the market is volatile, stocks are down, this might be the best time to get into the market. You don't want to buy at the peak. It's probably best to buy at the bottom. But in saying that, you want to buy companies that have a strong business model and that they can weather this storm. And then, of course, you want to be positioned in order to grow your wealth. And so I want to then pivot this into what this means for you as athletes. So having worked with athletes for almost 10 years, we find that over time, athletes will have a silo problem. And this is a result of, granted, you're busy, you're focusing on being competitive, sharpening your skills. And so oftentimes your financial planning takes a back seat. However, once money starts coming in, once you get contracts, endorsements, so we're finding this with the carded athletes that we work with, they end up buying financial furniture or products on a piecemeal basis. And as a result, there's no coordination. And so that coordination really comes from having a plan. And so this is caused by buying your financial products from different service providers, getting advice from accountants, lawyers, bankers, insurance people who don't talk to each other. And so you have to be aware of that. You have to ask yourself, how am I consuming the financial products that I need? And is there coordination? And so as a result, what we find is athletes end up thinking or saying to themselves, I don't really know how all these things that I have work together. I don't have very much confidence if I'm moving forward or not. And I find that I'm really heavily still reliant on exchanging my time, talent, and skill for money. And I don't have a continuity plan of what happens after I'm done competing. And so these are the things that we want to address. And this is what we call the silo problem. And so to get back on track, athletes need to have an integrated financial plan that keeps them and their advisors, again, accountable to the financial game plan. So you want to be accountable to the plan. So this is what the plan looks like. It's 9 rooms, and the most important part of your financial house is your foundation. It's really looking at your spending, because your spending or your cash flow is like the blood that's pumping through your heart. It's keeping you alive. And so when you look at your cash flow, your ability to borrow money, how you spend that money really is indicative of where you're going to be 3, 5, 10 years from now. Because the habits you have when it comes to spending today, if you don't develop good habits and they continually to be negative or bad habits, they will follow you throughout your career. And so we really want to focus on the cash flow and spending, which we're going to spend some time today. From there, you want to then look at managing the fact that 10 out of 10 people pass away. It's a statistical fact. The problem is we don't know when our expiry date is. And so we want to make sure we have estate and inheritance planning set in place. So especially as athletes, we always recommend you have a will, a power of attorney, and a healthcare directive. Now, depending which province you're in, so we're talking from the context of BC, you need a healthcare directive and a power of attorney in the event you cannot make decisions because you're injured, you're in a coma, or maybe you're out of the country. So you want to make sure you have documents that give somebody else a voice when you don't have a voice. And then from there, we start managing risks such as asset and income protection, having an emergency fund, the elephant in the room being debt reduction. So that's something I know Patrick and his team spend a lot of time on in helping athletes really manage their debt loads and how to pay that off. And then from there, it's all about making your money work hard for you from the perspective of asset management, from tax planning, savings and retirement, education savings, if you're still going to pursue further schooling. And we find a number of athletes they've put schooling on the shelf for now as they compete in their sport and they go back to it. So I know a number of you probably want to head to maybe medical school or finish engineering or other programs. And so there's the education savings piece. And then non-registered investments is money that's not in an RSP, tax-free savings account. If these are new acronyms to you, we'll unpack these a little later on in our workshop. So that being said, I know this can be overwhelming based on what I just talked about. That's where you really do need a team. And that's another way in which you can counter this silo problem. And going back to the accountability, moving you forward. So when you look at your advisory team as an athlete, you're going to need 4 trusted advisors. The first is a CFP. So taking a football analogy, think of them as your quarterback. So a certified financial planner not only creates your financial plan, they also monitor it. And the value comes when they're able to coordinate the work of your chartered professional accountant, your lawyer, and your banker. So for those of you who do not yet have an accountant or already have an accountant, there's 3 things you need to expect from them for them to do well. Number 1 is deduct. So basically give you the ability to deduct expenses related to earning your income as an athlete. Defer, which is deferring having to pay tax this year to a later year. So there's strategies they can employ to do that. And divide, so that you're not the one earning all the money. Perhaps there are ways in which you can divide that money amongst other family members so that you can reduce the taxes that you pay. Your lawyer, they're going to be an integral part of your team in terms of managing risk. And I know with a number of athletes we work with, they pursue incorporation as a way to mitigate risks. So they might be in a sports team where they get paid a salary, but they have other money coming in, such as endorsement, appearance fees, maybe they start a gelato store or some type of business. And so that money goes into a corporation. So then there's ways that they can mitigate risk from that standpoint. It could also be like a cohabitation agreement. If you have a partner and you're worried about some of the aspects of that related to your finances. And so that's where a lawyer comes in. And of course, estate planning. And then a banker, their job is really to give you access to credit. Now, there are a number of banks in our country that have special programs for athletes. You're probably familiar with them already. But really, their job is to provide you with money today or the ability to buy things today rather than having to save anywhere from 2 to 15 years before you could buy it. And so really, they're there to give you access to borrowed money or credit. Now, this being said, going back to accountability, when your team works together, then they're able to answer some of the key questions you might have very effectively, rather than just seeing it from one particular lens. So the first one is, how do I manage cash flow, debt, taxes, and investments? What are my cross-border tax issues if I earn money outside of Canada? So during tax time, we do host a tax workshop headed up by Patrick and a team of accountants that specializes with athletes who earn money from foreign jurisdictions. And whether they're Canadian or maybe they're from a different country competing here in Canada. And so we do have that. So keep an eye out for that workshop. And then the other question is, when should I incorporate? All right, so let's move into part 2. And I'm going to hand the mic over to Patrick very soon here to give us some tips on keeping more of what you earn from the standpoint of integrated financial planning. So go ahead, Patrick.
Thank you, Alphil. So as Alphil mentioned, in terms for the integrated financial planning for taxes and spending, it falls under the spending plan and the bookkeeping and tax. We're going to cover the tax planning and then incorporation and spending plan. When we go into that, we like to use the 3 habits for keeping more of what you earn. And the habit number 1 is to look at keeping more through tax planning. So quite often when I sit down and meet with athletes, one of the things that we do uncover and look at is your tax situation And I find that a lot of athletes that either file their own taxes or use an account, they're really only getting tax preparation versus tax planning. Tax preparation is really what you look is like you're doing. The analogy I use is you're driving and looking through the rearview mirror, looking at what you earned in terms of taxable income, can claim to reduce your taxable income and what credits are available to offset what taxes you owe. Where tax preparation is looking forward into the future, looking through the windshield so that you can look at tax strategies and are they aligned with your financial planning goals. I'm going to use a case study. Example here is Cassidy to help you understand what is taxable and non-taxable. That's another thing when I meet with athletes, especially if they're new into the field and start earning different high side hustles or different sources of income, they're not sure what is taxable and non-taxable. So we're going to go through that. And when it comes to taxable income, helping to raise awareness, okay, well, what are some of the deductions that they should be aware of because they don't get to keep all the money, right? Because then that, when they know what they can have net in their pocket, then we can start to look at creating that baseline spending plan for them. I'm going to pass it to Alphil to look at, how does our tax system works here in Canada as one of the deductions that the athletes need to be aware of.
Yeah, so this is using BC and federal rates combined. However, depending which province you're in, they're not going to be that much different. So basically, the principles remain the same across the country. So we live in a country where we have what's called a marginal tax system. So I want you to think of it as a staircase. So the first floor is zero. So everything you earn from $0 to $14,398, you pay zero tax on that money. However, if you earn $14,399, you have to pay 20 cents in taxes because you're over $14,398. So everything you earn from $14,399 to $43,070 is taxed at 20.06% or 20 cents per dollar. Now in Cassidy's case, she has taxable income of $45,000. You can see it there highlighted. And so everything she earns from $43,071 to $45,000 is taxed at 22.7%. So we did the math there on the bottom right of the screen. And so what you get here, that's 1929. So that's the difference between those two numbers. Only that amount is taxed at 22.7%, which is $438. However, everything she earned from $14,399 to $43,070 is taxed at $5,751. And so you can see as you progress in your career, some of you might be working or on a sports team earning over $227,000. You're going to pay 53 cents per dollar over $227,092. So I know when I speak to NHL players, they're just freaked out about it. They're like, what? And there's really no recourse because they're paid 100% pure salary. However, they can get incorporated if there's other money coming out that are coming in outside of the salary they receive from their sports team. And so that in mind, so that's a total of $6,189, but it doesn't end there. The government also charges Canadian pension plan. So CPP in this case, because Cassidy is getting employment income, is $23.65. So that's her contribution to the Canadian pension plan. And so the Canadian pension plan is a safety net available to Canadians, and you can take it out as early as age 60, but it's based on what you contributed over your working lifetime. And so in this case, her share is $23.65. Her employer is also paying $23.65. So that's important to note for those of you who are going to become self-employed. If you're self-employed in this country, you have to pay the employee portion and the employer portion. And so if Cassidy was self-employed, she'd have to pay $23.65 times 2 because she has to satisfy both the employer commitment and the employee commitment to the Canadian pension plan. And last but not least, there's employment insurance of $711. So I'll pass it back to Patrick and he'll unpack the net income associated with this.
Thank you, Alphil. And, if, after today's session, you're receiving different sources of income and you're not sure, don't hesitate to reach out. But in this case here, some of the taxable that you may or may not be aware is your as an athlete's prize money, speaking, endorsements. If you're getting other sources of income again, yeah, don't hesitate. We can help you identify what is taxable, just so you can plan properly. As we work down to the net income after taxes for Cassidy of $35,735 plus her non-taxable $32,000, that gives us a total of $67,735. Divide that by 12 months gives her $5,644 per month net. Now that we know what her net monthly is, we're going to jump into habit number 2. Look at the baseline for spending. We use a 50-30-20 rule. Now, this baseline just helps me gauge in terms for the individual I meet with, what is their circumstances. So every athlete I meet with, their financial situation is going to be different from their next teammate or other sports, based on their situation, goals, and priorities. If you look at the 50-30-20, 50% is the must-haves or things you cannot live without, and that falls under rent, groceries, transportation, interest-only payments to debt. Now, it's not uncommon living in the West Coast, especially in the Lower Mainland. Cost of living is quite high and expensive. That I've seen for individuals that they spend more than 50% to their must-haves. It could be even up to 70 or 80%. Okay. For the nice-to-haves or wants, that's 30%. Well, that's things that's eating out, buying luxury goods, travel, additional payments to debt. And then the last but not least, looking in the future to growing and investing your hard-earned savings, is looking at the personal financial goals, which is investing to TFSA, RSP, paying off debt, and building up your emergency fund.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. So that's important to have that baseline. So it's just really assessing the health of your spending plan, and definitely depending where you are in the country, there are different circumstances. But 50-30-20 is where we start, and of course, we just want to make sure that you're able to cover your must-haves, your needs, your nice-to-haves, as well as put away something for the future. Now, the question we get from athletes is, well, how do I keep more of what I earn? And so we want to start with a little bit of tax planning. So like Patrick mentioned, tax planning is looking through the windshield rather than tax preparation is looking through the rearview mirror. And so as an athlete, you need to start looking forward in terms of what your tax position will be, especially if you're planning to make money outside of Canada. But these principles still remain. So the first one is tax deductions are better than tax credits. So let's unpack that a little bit more. So tax credits, I want you to think of them as coupons. So they're coupons against taxes you owe. So in Cassidy's case, it was about $6,000. So once we know what she owes, we can apply the coupons against it. So it's like going so you're in Vancouver, we have Superstore. I know across the country, there are probably Loblaws. So anyways, there are all these Loblaw companies related to groceries and Shoppers Drug Mart, whatever. So you can get coupons from these places. And so let's say they say your grocery bill is $88, but you have $3 of coupons. So instead of paying $88, you only pay $85. So that's how tax credits work. The problem with tax credits is it's not a dollar for dollar. It's not worth dollar for dollar. So let's say you have tuition. So let's say you spend $50,000 to finish your degree and some additional training. So $50,000, tuition is only worth 20 cents for every dollar of tuition you spend. So on 50,000 times 20%, you now have $10,000 of coupons against future taxes. So one of the things you have to remember as an athlete, you don't have to wait until you make a lot of money to use these coupons. If you owe taxes this year, you're better off using those coupons right away so that that money is refunded back to you. And you get that money working for you now rather than waiting till later on. Because oftentimes we get athletes say, oh, you know what? I got all these tax credits. I got $10,000 of tuition tax credits. I'll wait until I make 100,000 or more a year. I'm like, well, dude, you already owe taxes. You might as well get that money back now. You don't have to wait until you make more money. The other one is eligible medical expenses. So that's a credit. And that's based on if you spend more than 3% of your earnings on medical expenses. And so we always recommend that instead of that, you consider what's called a health spending account. So a health spending account was created by the government to encourage us to prioritize self-care. If you're self-employed or incorporated, you can set up a health spending account so that you can deduct your healthcare expenses against your income, which is more powerful than using a credit. The other credit there is charitable donations. So if you donate to a registered charity more than $200, there's a pretty good coupon or tax credit associated with that. Now, in terms of tax deductions, these are better than tax credits because they are worth a dollar for dollar. So if you earn 100 grand and you have $10,000 of deductions, instead of paying tax at 100, you only pay tax at 90,000. So it reduces your taxable income. So these include registered retirement savings plan contributions. So you create RSP room through your salary. So for every dollar of salary you earn, you give birth to 18 cents of RSP room. And some of you may have pensions in the future. So if you have pensions from your employer, it does reduce your RSP contribution limit. Moving expenses. So if you move more than 40 kilometers to be closer to work, you can deduct the expenses related to moving. Health spending account, I already mentioned. Now, for some of you, you might have an employer that will sign what's called a T2200. If you have an employer who's willing to sign that, you're able to deduct expenses related to the income that you earn from your employer. Now, if you're self-employed, it would be what's called the T2125, and that's basically a schedule of expenses that you can deduct against the income you earned. And so what Patrick and I have done is we've put it on a slide here. And so you can see the income that you earn minus the expenses, and then that's when you pay tax. So as an employee, you earn money, you pay taxes, and then you spend. Whereas if you're self-employed or incorporated, you earn money, you spend on eligible business expenses, and then you pay taxes. And so the government designed it that way to encourage you and me to start businesses and grow those businesses. So they allow us to deduct expenses related to earning the income. And if you're ever in doubt, can I write this off? There's an acronym you need to know. It's called REOP, Reasonable Expectation of Profit. Did I buy a product or service with the reasonable expectation that it will help me generate income and therefore generate profit? And so keep that in mind. So if you can satisfy that criteria, you can more than likely deduct it. But of course, speak to an accountant to confirm to what extent you can do that. So I'm just going to break this down. So cost of goods sold, I know Patrick was mentioning some stories. There's some athletes, they created like I think it was a foot fungus cream or some kind of ointment that relieves the pain on their feet. And so there were some raw materials related to putting that formula together. And so that's what they mean by cost of goods sold. So do you have expenses related to raw materials to create the product that you're ultimately going to sell to the public? So that's what cost of goods sold is. Expenses, so you see the first one there, advertising. So if you do a website, business cards, letterhead, promotional items, that's all deductible because again, reasonable expectation of profit. Insurance, some of you will need some insurance to do what you do. Licenses and dues, professional fees, travel and hotels, telephone and utilities, and motor vehicles. So be careful with motor vehicles. The government likes to flag that one because they don't want us to abuse that in terms of writing off expenses related to vehicles. And then use of home. So for some of you, your side hustle might relate to you being at home. So you can deduct a portion of your heat and electricity, insurance, mortgage interest, property taxes, and depreciation. So depreciation is a good example would be, let's say you buy a laptop and you're using it for business or consulting or coaching, whatever it is you do, and you get paid for it, not as an employee, but as self-employed. Then that computer, let's say it's a MacBook, $2,000, it's good for 5 years of useful life. You're going to be able to deduct $400 a year for the next 5 years as you use that computer to generate income and hopefully profit. And so that's how this system works in terms of the T2125. Now, before we move on to the next thing, we just want to highlight things like international taxation of athletes. So there's going to be key factors that will influence the amount of tax you pay. And so this is courtesy of one of our partners that do the tax workshop during tax time. So this is from BDO, and I know they co-presented with Patrick earlier this year. And so they just want to remember or highlight things like residency of the athlete. So you do need to know that if you're in Canada for more than 181 days, you have to file a Canadian tax return. And so keep that in mind. Employment income or business income will also influence the tax you pay. The details of your contract. So who are the parties to the contract? Who's paying you the income? What's your tax status? So depending on your tax status here in Canada, there are different groups that have different status. Terms, value, nature of the income, when is the payment coming in, services to be performed under the contract, and location where the services are to be performed. So there's a distinction there. And so that falls under contract details. The other one is domestic tax rules. So both in the home country and the host country. So for Canada, they generally don't offer special tax concessions to athletes. And so you need to be aware of that, not only provincially, but if you're going to play in the States, there's going to be some state tax rules that are different. So you have to remember in the States, every state is governed individually. And that's why they're called the United States of America. So there is a federal umbrella, but each state has autonomy over its jurisdiction. And so they have their own respective tax rules. And last but not least, tax treaties. So some tax treaties contain special provisions, but they're not always clear. And so always consult a professional when it comes to the jurisdiction that you're going to be competing in or the sports team you'll be playing for. The other one is US citizens living in Canada. So I don't know if any of you were born in the States, you maybe came here when you were a young kid and you consider yourself Canadian, but you have US citizenship. And so you have to be aware that the US system is really completely different than the Canadian system. So there's only two countries in the world that will tax you based on citizenship as opposed to residency. So one is a country in Africa and the other one is the United States of America. And so regardless where you are in the world, you have to file basically 2 tax returns, if not more. And so be aware of that. And then if you're married, you and your spouse can file a joint federal US income tax return. And then the tax return filing deadline is June 15, as opposed to Canada is April 30th. So there's some differences there as well. And really for athletes, we find that it's managing the double taxation. So juggling that is what's really important in terms of not being offside. And we have worked with athletes where they haven't paid their US taxes and it wasn't a pretty day from the standpoint of what they owed and the IRS hunting them down basically. All right, the other thing is when you're a US citizen investing in Canada. So RSP investing is recognized in by Americans or by the IRS. And so things like Canadian mutual funds, they're okay to invest in. However, things like tax-free savings accounts, registered education savings plan, registered disability savings plans provide no preferential tax treatment. In fact, oftentimes they'll look at that as, oh, that's like you creating a Swiss bank account or an account in the Caymans. And so because of the disclosure requirements, they're pretty tough on these. So be aware of that. Also beware of private foreign investment company products like Canadian mutual funds and non-registered investments. And so these are known as PIFICs, and they do levy pretty punitive consequences. And so you need to be aware of that. The other one is Canadian holding companies owned primarily by US shareholders. These can be very complicated. And so a holding company comes about when you set up a separate company from your original company to do basically investing. So it's basically a company you create to do investing. And so that becomes problematic from the standpoint of the IRS in the US. And then you have to be aware of special reporting requirements for foreign held assets. So there's something called FBAR, which stands for Foreign Bank Account Reporting, as well as FATCA, which is Foreign Account Tax Compliance. And so again, if you're a US citizen living in Canada, you do have to be aware of these things. All right, so let's get into habit number 3 when it comes to keeping more of what you earn, and that's through incorporation. And so the question we often receive from athletes is, when should I incorporate? Is there a litmus test? And so we always say that you need to consider incorporation when you can consistently save at least $40,000 every year inside a corporation. So think of it this way: if you've had your fun, you've spent for your lifestyle, you've done all that stuff, and you have 40 grand and you're like, what do I do with this? This is like more money than I need. That's when you need to think about incorporation and seriously consider it. And I'll open it up to Patrick later on. He's going to talk about a case study or some case studies that he worked on, that he worked with athletes, wherein this was really an important piece for them to consider. So to answer this question, you have to ask yourself, well, do I have debts that I want to pay off first? Do I have a big ticket purchase plan? Maybe you want to buy a home, you want to buy a new car. So there's no sense going through the process of incorporation, which I'm going to unpack in a few minutes, if at the end of the day, you're going to pull out most or all of the money out of the corporation. So it's not necessary to go through all the process of getting incorporated and the costs involved, only to take all the money out. So you want to be able to keep money in your corporation for a later future goal or date. So typically retirement, it's just another way for you to keep more of what you earn, because with a corporation, you only pay 11 cents of tax for every dollar that you keep inside, as opposed to what you saw with the personal rates, it could be as high as 53.5%. And last but not least, are you planning to buy into a business or a practice? That will also inform when you should incorporate. I'm going to introduce you to Melissa. So Melissa's taxable income is $140,000, and this comes from self-employed income, a team contract, some prize money, as well as some speaking engagements. She's still a carded athlete, so that's non-taxable at $21,180. And based on her expenses, again, the reasonable expectation of profit, she was able to deduct $10,000 associated with earning that $140,000. So at the end of the day, her taxable income is $130,000. But another fact about Melissa is she only needs $45,000 a year for her share of household expenses. So her partner also works and provides some after-tax income. And so when they did their cash flow and spending plan, they realized, okay, Melissa, you need to bring in $45,000 a year to make our household expenses work, which means anything above that could be kept inside a corporation. And so bringing home that point that I talked about. So with Melissa, she's in the 40.7% tax bracket. And if you average out, because again, the marginal tax system, that's about 27% when we add all of these tax brackets and divide it by the number of tax brackets. So at the end of the day, we put 40.7 cents because that's the bracket she's in terms of the 130,000 that's taxable. As opposed to being incorporated, she would pay 11% on profits under $500,000. So that becomes really important. So where did we get the 11%? It's 9% federal, and in BC, it's 2% provincially. So your province, if you're outside of BC, will be different, but it's going to be around 11%. And so let's take a look at if Melissa decided not to get incorporated. End of the day, she'd pay about $38,647 in taxes. So that's $31,647 for the taxes themselves. And again, the $7,000 because she's self-employed for the employee and the employer portion. So now let's break down, well, what if she is incorporated? So like I said, she only needs $45,000 to put food on the table alongside her partner. And so to do that, she would only take out $60,000 from her corporation, pay the $10,000 in tax, and she would have about $50,000 to satisfy the household expenses. So what that means is she's able to leave $65,000 in the corporation, and she would only pay $7,000 of tax on that 65 because it's taxed at 11%. And then CPP. So when you're incorporated, you can actually opt out of CPP. You don't have to pay it. But if you do that, you need to invest it somewhere else because the opportunity cost is about $1,200 a month when you're 60 years old. All right, so then the total tax would be $24,440. So there's a savings of $14,207 if she paid the CPP. And if she did not pay the CPP, the savings is about $21,000. So that's quite significant from the standpoint of keeping more of what you earn when you're incorporated. So who helps you get incorporated? You need three professionals. The first one is the accountant. So think of them as the architect. They're there to design the ownership structure of your corporation, as well as do the ongoing yearly tax filings and tax planning. The lawyer is the one that pulls the trigger, so they execute the legal work associated with getting incorporated, and they do ongoing yearly minute book filings to keep you on side. And a financial planner, they're there to help you create wealth, but more important, they're there to coordinate the work of the accountant and the lawyer so that everybody's on the same page, part of an integrated plan. Now, in terms of cost, accountants will charge between $1,000 and $2,500 for the initial setup of a corporation and $3,500 to $4,500 per year for financial statements and filing taxes. Of course, you could probably find it cheaper depending where you're at, and perhaps you know somebody but that typically is the cost for an accountant. Lawyers will charge $1,500 to $3,000 for the setup and $500 to $1,000 for ongoing minute book filing and updates. Financial planners, so you need to have this discussion with whoever is providing you financial advice and claiming that they're a financial planner. So they can get paid either commission-based, fee-based, so typically a percentage of the money that you entrust for them to manage and invest on your behalf, or you pay them per hour. So anywhere from $175 to $500 per hour. Now, as an athlete, you'd also need to know there is an evolution to your corporation. So I already alluded to this earlier. So as you start to make profits, as you start building money in your corporation, you pay off your mortgage, you're probably going to be uncomfortable with the amount of money inside your corporation. And so you're going to want what's called creditor protection. So you want to make sure that if you ever get sued, no one can get at that money. And so you would create what's called a holding company. And so a holding company is more of a advanced structure, but athletes do use them to protect themselves from creditors. And so now I'm going to pass it on to Patrick. He's going to share some examples of athletes that he's helped in the last, I guess, 10 years associated with getting incorporated.
Yeah, thank you, Alphil. A couple of stories I can share as well. One of the athletes where to stop the bleeding of paying high taxes that they weren't aware of, that incorporation was available for them. This individual was in the top marginal tax bracket just from the success of the sport, and endorsements, and the different side hustles that was coming through for the athlete. And when they met with us, took our education and looked at different options, that the incorporation did make sense for that individual, and they didn't need all the income that they were earning. This is where we helped them with the incorporation, so that again they saved about over $140,000 in taxes just for the incorporation. And fast forwarding, I would say 6-7 years now, this individual does have that holding company where they are able to start investing in, buying other things such as real estate and then other investment opportunities. The other piece where it was early enough that for this individual, as they saw the ramp up of income just with working with an agency, that we helped them get incorporated midway through the year. And we were able to help flow that taxable income into the corporation instead of personally. The last story I would say, it depends on your sport. I know that for some sport, they need to maintain their NCAA status. So that's where the Amateur Athletes Trust is required. So just on a high level, with meeting a couple of athletes that I've met over the years where they have had the Amateur Athletes Trust, one thing to keep in mind and to help you with, looking forward is with corporation, there is no expiry date. So long that you have continued to file your corporate taxes, you can continually keep this corporation even after you retire, because your corporation may evolve from not just endorsements, but maybe you start coaching, speaking engagements, or start your business. The thing with where opposed to the Amateur Athletes Trust, once you retire, you have 8 years to dissolve this. And when you do dissolve and draw out the income, it's taxable income. So what I've seen that with athletes that I met in transition, that start withdrawing it, they're earning taxable income, whether they started a business, got hired. So they're actually really just deferred and actually some of them paid up even more taxes. So just keep that in mind, with the planning, with the end in mind. Think about, life after sport. What do you plan to do? And just plan strategically if you do need to set up an AAT or you have one.
Yeah, so that's a good transition to this next part, which is protecting your profit center. So this is for those of you who are just starting or maybe just got recently carded and you're looking to your future and the opportunities available to that. So really what we want you to start embracing is the fact that you need to act like an athlete, so that's a given, but you need to think like a business owner. And if you meet a business owner, they're very cognizant of the fact how they make money. And based on how they make money, they do what they can to protect that stream of income or those income streams. And so for you, it really is about protecting your profit center. And right now as an athlete, especially if you're brand new, your profit center is your skills, your ability to turn that skill into income. And so if that skill is compromised in any way, you need to make sure that it's protected. And so I'm going to pass it on to Patrick, and he's really going to unpack what this means from the standpoint of your planning.
Yeah, thank you, Alphil. So like Alphil mentioned, when working with athletes, find that this piece of the asset income protection, protecting your profit center is commonly overlooked. So one of the things that Alphil alluded earlier is protecting your ability to earn income, but also when you do have that income and to be able to let it grow is protecting that and transition it to passive income, so making money while you sleep. We look at protecting your profit center, that's managing the risk of getting sick or dying too soon. So I do recommend athletes to prioritize what I call the insurance trifecta, which is life insurance, a lump sum paid up to your beneficiaries to help with the adjustment of life-changing events, so a death. Disability insurance, which is monthly income replacement in the event that you're sick and ill. Critical illness, so a lump sum of money paid upon a diagnosis. And we find often, for fortunate or unfortunate, within our firm, we've on a yearly basis seen some critical illness claims that go through every year. And we often find that it's not just for them, but for their family or spouse to take time off to be with them while they recover. And then if you're a business owner or a clinic owner, there is business overhead expense, which is a monthly income to cover for business expenses. Now, I know for some of you athletes may say, hey, I haven't been able to qualify for insurance or have a challenge because maybe I'm a Paralympian or I have a disability. But however, I have worked with a number of athletes, and actually more recently, this recent athlete that it is a Paralympian. They weren't able to qualify, but we were able to look at strategic and creative ways that we were able to get them coverage. So if you do have questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll look at your situation, see what we can qualify for you to help protect that profit center.
Yeah. So thanks, Bob. So yeah, it's really important, especially when you're competing and you could be in harm's way. It's good to know that you'll have some backup through these. What I like what you call it, insurance trifecta. All right. So as we go to a close here, we just want to unpack the other thing business owners do, and that's focus on buying more cash cows and cash pigs to build passive income. So really position yourself in a way where, again, you're making money while you sleep, so that you're not always dependent on exchanging your time, talent, and skill to make money. And so we just want to leave you with this. It's really the rule of 3% or rule of 4%. So the question we often get is, well, how much is enough? And how do I make my money work hard for me? So let's say you need $60,000 a year for the next 30 years to achieve a work optional lifestyle, meaning you choose to work rather than you have to go and work and make an income. So people go, well, how much is that pot of gold or pot of money that I need? So if you use the standard rule of 4%, 60,000 divided by 4%, you would need $1.5 million saved up. If you use the rule of 3%, which is more conservative, and we liken this one because of the volatility in the markets that we're seeing, so that would be 2 million. So 6,000 divided by 3% is 2 million. And so the question becomes, well, how do I get there? What's the road to $2 million? So as an athlete, you need to be aware that you potentially could have all three of these pillars. So you might have an employer who's sponsoring a pension. You might have government programs where you're contributing to CPP, and there's also government programs you don't need to contribute to. You just get free government gravy, I call it, or government money. And of course, the money that you save on your own, so personally and through your corporation or business. When we look at the government, first the employer. So the employer sponsored come in two flavors. There's defined contribution or defined benefit. So defined benefit are the traditional pensions. So if you're a public school teacher, a registered nurse, or you work for the government, there's a guaranteed payout based on how many years you worked with them. And then the other one's defined contribution, which is more of the majority of employer-sponsored plans, where there's no guarantee as to what that income will be, because the money is invested in the markets or in the stock market. And so the onus is on you to choose the proper investments for your retirement income planning. Now, in terms of government programs, there are three. So we call these the safety nets. The first one is the Canadian Pension Plan. So if you work for 40 years, averaging $45,000 a year in Canada, you'll qualify for about $1,200 a month. But if you look at 2021, Canadians who were on the CPP, they were earning $700 a month. So you can take out CPP as early as age 60 or as late as age 70. And if you take it out at age 60, you get about 36% less than what you would get at 65. And if you take it out at age 70, you get 42% more than what you would get at age 65. So again, there's some planning involved when the best time for you is to take it out. OAS is the old age security. So long as you're breathing at age 65 and you're not incarcerated, you get $642 a month if you've been in Canada for more than 40 years. However, the government giveth, the government taketh away. So think of your parents, grandparents, if they're over age 65, if they earn over $79,845 this year, their old age security is getting eroded by 15 cents for every dollar over that number. And that number is adjusted to inflation, so it does go up on a yearly basis. And then the last one is the guaranteed income supplement. So these are means tested and income tested. So if a Canadian is earning under $19,000 a year after age 65, there's up to $959 of additional support to help them in retirement. Then the question becomes, do I still need $2 million? So let's say you're getting $2,800 a month from your employer pension. Your CPP and OAS is targeted to be $1,400 a month. So $5,000 minus $2,800 minus $1,400 is a shortfall of $800 a month or $9,600 a year. So now if we apply the rule of 3% to that, instead of having to save $2 million, you now only need to save $320,000. So these are calculations that we do during your coaching session in order to anticipate what you will need for a work optional lifestyle. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, and he's going to talk about strategies to get to that $320,000 much quicker.
Thank you, Alphil. Before we go into the strategies, it's important to know the two differences between a tax-free savings vehicle and a tax-deferred savings vehicle. Tax-free is your investments. When you put into it, it grows tax-free, but it's also tax-free when you withdraw it down the road. Where tax-deferred, when you put the money into the investment into that tax-deferred savings program, it will grow tax-free, but when you draw it out, it will be taxable. Okay, so it will be considered as taxable income. Let's look at the different eligible savings vehicle that may be available for you as an athlete. They can be up to 8 available for you. The first one is your principal residence, which is unique to Canada. So if you buy a home, whether a condo apartment, and you live in it, it's your principal residence. When you sell it in the future for a gain for more than what you paid for, that gain is non-taxable in Canada. That is not the case for, if you live in the States or other country. A tax-free savings account, exactly what it says, tax-free. What you put in, what it grows to, whatever risk you took, high or low risk, and what you draw it out is non-taxable. To be eligible for the tax-free savings account, you got to be a resident of Canada and also be 18. So depending when you turn 18, you will start growing room. Currently, it's $6,000 every year. Come January 1st. That you will accrue room to. And if you haven't used the room in the previous years, it will carry forward. So the lifetime right now is $81,500. Come January, there's going to be an additional $6,000. Where a registered savings plan is based on earned taxable income. Alpha alluded that, to earn RSP room, it's there's a formula of multiplied by 18%. So using the example of 10,000 of taxable income times 18%, you'll have 1,800 of RSP room that you'll grow that you can contribute to the following year. And it is taxable when you draw it out, so it's a tax deferral. The new program, First Home Savings Account, hasn't come out yet, but it will next year. This is another tax deferral and also can be tax-free. Basically to help Canadians save for their buying their first home. Now, in addition to all these registered savings vehicle, there is corporate class. So this is for non-registered investments, where instead of paying tax each year, you pay tax on when you withdraw it. Where the Section 148 of the Income Tax Act is for advanced planning for my clients and athletes, is using insurance-based investing. So it's creating your own pension plan using a life insurance contract where you're able to invest or grow this savings inside in a tax-free environment. And then there's the registered distributed savings plan for those that are receiving the tax credit, like Paralympians or your market restriction. For every dollar you contribute, the government will match $3. So that's a 300% return without even taking any risk. Lastly, I talked about earlier, amateur athletes trust. That may make sense depending on your situation and requirement as an athlete. When it comes to, now that you know the different tax savings, sort of different savings vehicle, now there's the investment game plan that you'll look at. So when you work with your financial planner, they will help you build that investment game plan so that it's aligned with your goals and priorities through the different investment savings vehicle programs that I went over that's available for you. Now, there's going to be various types of investments in savings program, different risks associated with it. So it's important that you have it reviewed regularly, and that financial plan can help you provide a second opinion to make sure that you're on track. Tips for protecting your profit center, just to recap of the insurance investment, lock in your health early. So like I mentioned earlier, for some athletes, they may have a hard time qualifying, and that's because of due to their health, right? Whether it's injury, illness, past, maybe it's from birth or during their lifetime. It's one of those things. You can't buy car insurance once you've got in a car accident. You got to buy it before you need it, and that's the same for health insurance. And also, the earlier you are, the cheaper it is actually due to age, just because mortality rates. Maximize tax-free, tax-deferred vehicles. If you're not sure, again, work with your financial planner, look at what's best suitable options for you, and then start investing early to optimize the power of compounding interest.
Thanks, Pat. All right, so we're going to transition it to Q&A. So just some takeaways from this workshop. First and foremost, inspect what you expect from your financial plan and advisors. So review the 9 rooms of the financial house. And we always recommend that you work with professionals who understand your journey as an athlete and are committed to working collaboratively. And that will really save you a lot of time and stress in the future, so long as they're working and aligned and working off the same game plan, which is your financial plan. The other one is practice habits to keep more of what you earn. So prioritize tax deductions, use the tax credits right away, incorporate when you can save at least $40,000 a year inside a corporation, and use the 50-30-20 spending plan just to get a gauge in terms of your spending plan health. And last but not least, protect your profit centers with adequate insurance. So customize your insurance trifecta, as well as maximize the use of tax-free and tax-deferred vehicles. So we suggest you explore those before you do non-registered investing so that your money can grow much quicker. All right, so we'll pass it on to the team. And I know Kelly from our team is going to moderate the questions if there are any questions.
Yes, so feel free to drop your question in the chat box, or you can just unmute and ask your question, depending on your preference. And I'll read whatever question you have from the chat box and address it to Patrick or Alphil.
Yeah, so as you guys do that, I just want to remind you of the athlete help desk. So whether you're a coach or an athlete, this help desk was created to help you answer any financial concerns or questions that you might have. So the QR code is on the screen, and Patrick and his team will provide you with 2 private and confidential financial coaching sessions. So these sessions are free of charge to you as part of the CSI community. And Patrick and his team will help you create a comprehensive plan, help you reduce debt and taxes, answer your questions about incorporation, as well as investing. All right. Sure.
Yes, so our first question is there a limit maximum to tuition credits you can use per year? Like, is there a maximum limit to tuition credits you can use per year?
Well, you can't go past 0, so you can exhaust it. So here's how it goes. So if you look at your notice of assessment, and so for example, I was helping, I think it was a medical resident, and they had $100,000 of tuition credits on the federal side. So the federal side is worth about 15 cents per dollar. And on the provincial side, it's 5 cents per dollar. So that's where you get the 20 cents. So at least on the federal component, they have $15,000 of coupons. And I think in this residency year, they owed about $10,000 of taxes. So we applied the appropriate amount to wipe out that $10,000 of taxes owing. So then they actually got a refund of $10,000. So you can't overdo it in terms of get more than what you owe in taxes. So that would be the limit. And whatever you have left over, you can use for the next year.
So
yeah, sorry.
Candice asks if are you asking about the Sport Canada tuition credit?
Okay. Okay, I'm familiar with the tuition tax.
Yeah, no, but it depends on that individual here if they're talking about the Sports Canada tuition. But as far as the government side,
Yeah, and I want to just clarify if that's which one if you're talking about the AP funding or if you're talking.
yeah.
Unmute your mic if you would. Okay. Go.
So the question was geared for the government side.
Yeah. So then that's Alphil's answer.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Are sponsorship contracts like carding, as in they're not taxable, or do they count as income?
So I can answer to this. So there are, so AAP, as you know, what stands for Athlete Assistance Program, it is not considered as income. It's assistance to help you with your sport. And because they're not taxable, you don't get a tax receipt for it, and you're not required to declare that income. So it's non-taxable. So just treat it as a reimbursement for your representation for Canada.
Nicola, you have another question?
Yeah, I was going to type it, but I didn't. Yeah, it's too long to type. So the question is, what's your guys' personal predictions on the next 18 months? Do we think there seems like an inevitable recession to happen at the beginning of the year following the US, whatever? Do we think we're already pretty high with all the indexes and stuff like that? Do we see that's going to be like going down in the short term? By short term, I mean like 6 months to a year. Like what are you guys seeing from that side as far as the market's taking a turn back to, maybe we won't call it normal, but getting past the recession phase?
Yeah. One of the recent education training sessions I attended where economist was speaking, and we don't have the magic ball, but based on trends and data, which always is a lagging, right? They always, because you have to get the data and then they put it out. But just from the current, trends and data that they're seeing, is they project that 2023 is where we would expect probably to see the bottom of the market. So when we go through recession, there's going to be contraction, and then we hit the bottom, what we call the trough, and then things start to recover. They foresee that trough is somewhere in the 2023 year. So
what a vague prediction. 12 months, yeah, sometime in 2023. Fair enough, though. No one has the possible.
But give that in perspective. If you look at previous recessions, just on an average, you gotta count out COVID. When March 2020, the market dropped significantly fast, but recovered in 6 months. That is an anomaly. I would say what we're going through right now is more the traditional, where it's over like 18 to 28 months. As you've seen, if you follow the markets, if you're invested, that this every the first 10 months of the year has been negative months, right? So we are closer to that bottom, but as we get out of it, it's not going to be a quick recovery, I would say.
Amy, you have your next question?
Yeah, I think this is the one in the chat, and I think it's a loaded question, but I think they're meaning, are sponsorship contracts taxable and count as income, which I think it depends, but I think that's a big question that we get quite often.
Yeah, sponsorship contracts. So unlike carding, so if it's sponsorship contracts, we have to read the contracts and how is that the verbiage. So this is where I've had a couple of athletes come to us and, hey, this is my situation. They were I use one example. They had a sponsorship contract. They were actually with a cycling team. in the US. So they were earning US income. So that's taxable in your different jurisdiction. As Alphil talked about, the difference in how the US tax system works. And then now this individual signed on with a new team out in the UK. So they have a global tax situation. For that particular case for that individual, it is taxable. The other thing is, Alphil mentioned about, are you a contractor or are you an employee? Because if you're a contractor, then that individual can write off expenses, right? So it depends. And this is where leveraging a larger accounting firm that can have different departments to help with that athlete specific situation. So.
Are there any other questions? Oh, yes, Candice.
Is there any advice that you could give athletes in terms of ways that they could work with sponsors to avoid it being taxable? I know for myself, I had one experience with a sponsor where they just paid my expenses, and then that way it wasn't taxable. It was a shortcut out of giving the company just giving me cash and then it being taxable. Is there any other kind of advice you could give around?
Sorry, Candice, it's just your voice is very faint.
Sorry, is that better?
Yes, much better.
Yeah, my headphones just kicked in. Sorry. Yeah, just any advice that you can give for athletes and how they could work with sponsors to avoid it being taxed? Or is that more of a one-on-one kind of conversation?
Yeah, so when I sat with in a meeting with an accountant and an athlete, they go, is there expectation of return of a service, right? Exchange of service. So is it just a one-time thing that they're helping out with the athlete and that's it, or is there a contract in place, right? That whether it's a monetary, so there's different types of sponsorship, monetary, right, where they give you money, or exchange of service, where based on that sponsor, maybe they provide a service that gets, and they, in lieu of monetary, they give the athlete, equipment, right, or something like that. And then there is an expectation of exchange of service. Maybe they do some, appearances, speaking to their corporate team, stuff like that. Then that would be part of business, and that would be taxable, right? But if there's a sponsorship, again, right, you're a contractor, then if there's expenses that's related to what Alphil talked about, reason what ROEP, expense related to getting this contract, then you can deduct eligible expenses against this sponsorship contract income.
Great, thanks. Yeah. I also had one other question, while I'm unmuted, the difference between the in terms of going towards an RSP versus a tax-free savings. I don't know if
the tax-free savings account.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Is there like a better recommendation of for work through one until you've kind of exhausted as much as you can through your RSPs, or is it
that's a good question. I actually
magic number here?
Yeah. With in the more introductory sessions, like we've actually had in the past, like TFSA versus RSP, and which is better for me. So it will depend on the individual situation. But a tax-free savings account, if you remember, that it's not based on income, right? You get room to be able to contribute based on residency, and you're over the age of 18. So you may have as much as 81,500 room to be able to contribute to. It's regardless how much income you earn. So any individual, they can use this as short-term, mid-term, or long-term savings program, right? So it's a good place that it's eligible for all Canadians, so long they're over the age of 18. For RSP, and I come through across this for a lot of athletes, because maybe especially a majority of the income is non-taxable, they're not really growing much room to RSP, so they're not able to contribute for one. The other piece is looking at, hey, if you do have room, where is my tax bracket, where Alphil has up on here, right? As you can see that if an individual was earning high income, they're not incorporated, and don't have the AAT, and we'll just use the highest tax bracket, 53%, every dollar that they contribute into your RSP, they will, in the bracket over 227,000, they will get 53 cents back for every dollar they contribute. So until it brings them down to the 49% tax bracket, 46, right? So if they know that in the future that their income is higher, they can hold off on contributing to RSP. The other way is if they do decide to contribute now, you can claim that RSP deduction in a future year. You can carry forward when they're in a higher tax bracket. So it's a bit of a tax plan.
Yeah, so the key is you want to contribute to your RSPs in these higher brackets, and you want to take it out in a lower bracket. So I use my wife, for example. So she contributed to her RSP. She did a lot of overtime. She's in the healthcare space. And so I think she was at like the 38% bracket. So she put it in at that time. And then she took some time off work because we had a kid. And so she was able to take her RSPs out at the lowest bracket, which was 20 cents. So although the government gave her a tax refund at 38.29%, she was able to get that money back at 20-cent tax rate. So that's where the RSP becomes really effective. You contribute in a high bracket year and you take it out in a low bracket year. So whether that's you're taking leave from work, a sabbatical, or maybe you get incorporated and you only take out dividends. So that's a bit more advanced planning. But then we know with some athletes, they know there's years where they're going to earn, significant income that cannot be put in a corporation, let's say. So they'll do an RSP contribution so that they can get the maximum refund based on their tax bracket. And then once they're incorporated, they can now manage that faucet in terms of how much comes out of the corporation. So I do know some professionals and athletes, they'll take out, just maybe under 50,000 a year and then pay the average. So they're at 0 to 22. So that's probably about 16% average tax rate. And so they're able to take advantage of that. Because once you're incorporated, if you can go that way, you have a faucet. You can decide and dictate how much you take out of your corporation. And so if you do have RSPs, you can what they call melt it down. So you can withdraw from it on a more tax efficient basis based on these tax rates. And so that's the rule of thumb. Contribute in a high bracket year, take it out on a low bracket year for RSPs. And just like Patrick mentioned, the TFSA is a good prescription anytime, because you can use it as a short-term, mid-term, or long-term savings strategy. But the downside to a TFSA is you don't get a refund for what you contribute. You're putting in after-tax dollars. As opposed to an RSP, you do get a tax refund, plus the money grows tax-free. But the problem is you pay tax when you take it out. And so you need to manage it properly.
Yeah, have a plan.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any final questions? Okay.
Questions come afterwards later on, and comes up, then that's where the one-on-one opportunity you can ask later on in the private one-on-one coaching session too. And I also want to give kudos to Kelly. She made the landing site, so it looks really good. Yeah, give kudos to her.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much to all of you, and thanks Kelly for putting this together. I think the landing page is great. It's a really easy place for athletes to go and be able to tap into the resource of these one-on-one sessions, and yeah, you can dive into any of these spaces that you need to, or ask further questions on those calls. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you for the athletes to joining tonight as well. And hopefully this was informative, and we're looking forward to working with you in the future, and we'll see you at tax season.
Look forward to it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Be safe. Thank you.
Awesome.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you everyone. It's awesome.